This episode of The Dig is brought to you by our listeners, who support us at patreon.com, and by Haymarket Books, which has loads of great left-wing titles, perfect for Dig listeners like you. One that you might like is How to End Family Policing, From Outrage to Action. From leading abolitionist organizers, a much-needed intervention arguing that the systems that purport to protect children make them and our communities less safe. Based on decades of shared organizing, study, and lived experience, the contributors to How to End Family Policing argue that the child welfare system cannot build genuine safety. Rather than the misleading language of child welfare and child protective services, scholars and activists use the term family policing to name the fact that these institutions and practices are neither neutral nor benign. Offering first-person testimony and laying out visions for alternatives, this book is an urgent call to build flourishing communities. Find How to End Family Policing at haymarketbooks.org, where all paperback books are 20% off every day. Welcome to The Dig, a podcast from Jacobin Magazine. My name is Daniel Denver, and I'm broadcasting from Providence, Rhode Island. Less than a decade ago, it was a really big deal to elect one single socialist to city council in Seattle or to the state legislature in New York. Today, a Democratic socialist is mayor of New York City. Left-wingers hold office all over the place, and this year, this cycle, left-wing candidates are running credible races at every level of government. I can't talk about every single race, every single candidate, but I am going to do a couple episodes, maybe a few episodes, highlighting just the remarkable variety of candidates in the fight. Candidates fighting for social, economic, and ecological justice, fighting against imperialism and genocide. Candidates who are up against the combined power of oligarchy, the Democratic establishment, and reactionary MAGA Republicans. This episode includes short interviews with Michigan U.S. Senate candidate Abdul El-Sayed, Tennessee U.S. House candidate Justin Pearson, New York U.S. House candidate Darializa Avila Chevalier, Oregon State Senate candidate Tammy Carpenter, Providence mayoral candidate David Morales, and D.C. City Council candidate Aparna Raj. Before we get this started, this podcast, really my entire existence, is just zealously dedicated to pushing our shared hegemonic project forward, pushing it forward on the local, state, national, and global level. This podcast is my day job. I pay a bunch of people to help put it out every week, and we can only do that because listeners like you become monthly or annual donors at patreon.com/thedig. This is a not-for-profit political education project. Every episode is free for everyone who wants to listen. That's what your contributions make possible. They make possible this entire paywall-free situation. Plus, we have swag. Donate now. That's patreon.com/thedig. And one more thing. Come party with The Dig. Next Dig parties are happening in Seattle, LA, and Berlin. The Dig Party in Seattle, Wednesday, May 20th, from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. at Stoop Brewing. It's co-sponsored with How's Our Neighbors, the group organizing behind Seattle's really exciting new social housing program. The Dig Party in Los Angeles will be May 26, 6 p.m. onwards at Audiograph Beer Company. It's co-sponsored with DSA-LA and the National Day Laborer Organizing Network, or NDLON. Please, RSVP. Links are in the show notes. And Berlin. I will be speaking on Friday, June 12th, 5 p.m. at Technische Universität Berlin, TU Berlin. I'll be talking about the current situation here in the rather twisted United States of America. This is part of the Take Back the Future conference hosted by Socialist Democratic Student League, the campus affiliate of Die Linke. That'll be followed by a party for Dig listeners and friends of the pod starting at 6:45 p.m. The exact location of both, I don't know yet. It'll be announced, but it'll all be at TU Berlin. Okay, here's Abdul El-Sayed, a candidate for U.S. Senate in Michigan who has, since our discussion, surged into the lead. That's thanks in part to the Democratic establishment and Israel apologists who created a fake scandal over Abdul's decision to appear with Hasan Piker, a move that has backfired quite spectacularly. Abdul El-Sayed, welcome to The Dig.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan.
This cycle has been great for the left across the country. We're seeing left-wing candidates surge all over the place on a message that's anti-oligarchy, pro-Palestine, anti-war, anti-fascist, anti-ICE, taking on big tech. But every state is also, of course, unique and internally very diverse. Michigan is home to Detroit, battered by decades of deindustrialization and white flight, suburbanization. Flint, where people were forced to drink poisoned water. Dearborn is the capital of Arab America. That whole area, birthplace and headquarters of the UAW and the Big Three. Macomb County, north of Detroit, is where white working class people shifting rightward were first called Reagan Democrats. They're vast stretches of rural Michigan up to the most remote corners of the Upper Peninsula. The right has for decades used those differences to divide people against each other. How do you and your campaign map out the state you're running to represent in the U.S. Senate? How do you and your campaign encounter those divisions and then begin to stitch together common purpose and solidarity across them?
You're right about Michigan. It is a beautiful tapestry of a number of different types of people who've all come to one place to become one type of person, which is a Michigander who right now is struggling under a profound amount of economic and political pain. And rather than think through all of these differences, our campaign is about connecting across all of the similarities. No matter who you are, how you pray, who you love, what you do for work, you really want to make sure that you can do work. You want to make sure that that work is commanding a fair wage. You want to make sure that you can keep a roof over your head. You want to make sure that you can see a doctor when you need one. And you want to make sure that you have the right to be able to voice your opinion in our democracy. Those are the things that connect a Reagan Democrat, quote unquote, in Macomb County to an Arab mom in Dearborn, to a Black auto worker in the city of Detroit, to a farmer in Traverse City, to a miner in the Upper Peninsula. And so we're focused on a message that steps past the ridiculous divisions that MAGA and other culture warriors have tried to put in front of us, and brings us back to the fact that it's not about left or right in our politics anymore. It is about the fact that too many of us are locked out, and then there are the folks who are doing the locking out. And what you can get from me is that I will always be on the side of the locked out against the folks who hold the keys. So we're fighting to get money out of politics, put money in your pocket past Medicare for all. That means banning the whole corporatized infrastructure of political destruction, right? It means ending corporate contributions. It means standing with unions and small businesses against big corporations. It means taxing billionaires their wealth. It means keeping our money here at home to invest in our schools and our healthcare rather than dropping bombs on other people and their schools and their healthcare. And it means finally guaranteeing healthcare to everybody through Medicare for all.
The entire establishment manufactured controversy over Hasan Piker was initially sparked, I think, by your decision to host a rally with him. And the move backfired pretty spectacularly. You stood firm, and all it did, I think, was raise both of your profiles and introduce you to a lot of new people who might like what you both have to say. What did opponents of the left, various camps of them probably, what did they hope to accomplish by ginning up this fake scandal? And what does it mean that these old tricks used to shut down or stigmatize the left just don't seem to work anymore?
Let me tell you about what we accomplished. First, a whole swath of Michiganders learned who I was beyond the talking points, because I think people are sick and tired of the fact that these old time institutions think they can tell you what you can think and who you can talk to. And all that does is, in the era of the internet, it encourages people to go figure out who it is that they're trying to cancel today. And so a lot of people figured out who I was and what I wanted to do. I want to get money out of politics. I want to put money in your pocket. I want to pass Medicare for all. And most folks are like, oh, yeah, that's why they're trying to cancel them. I get it. Number two, I think people realize I don't back down to anyone ever on anything. And we probably need a couple more of those on the anti-fascism side of things right now, on the anti-Trump side of things right now, on the anti-corporate dominance of our lives things right now, and on the pro-healthcare, pro-peace, pro-justice side of things right now. And then the third thing we were able to accomplish through all of this is that we were able to get our message out to folks who felt locked out of our politics structurally, young people who felt like there is actually no political conversation that's being had for them. And, it's interesting, right? Because you asked the question about why they did this. I am an existential threat to a system of politics that tells us that corporations should be able to dominate our lives, get to dictate what happens to our tax dollars, that war is the best end outcome of what government can offer you, and that you cannot have healthcare because it is just too expensive to offer in the richest, most powerful country in the world. And I think they thought that they could tie a few things that a person we've had a conversation with in reaching out to his audience around me, and then paint us all with one broad brush. But you'd think that the establishment would have learned its lessons from the great cancel culture fights of the early 2020s, right? I remember the go on Rogan discourse, right? I remember the frustration that everybody had with the attempt to just cancel voices you don't like. I don't agree with anything or with everything anyone has said, right? Chances are you and I don't agree on everything. I've been married for 20 years. I don't agree with everything my wife has said. And at the same time, I'm interested in reaching out to an audience that listens to people, because I think that audience deserves a pathway into our politics. And let's be clear, when you try to cancel somebody who has a big platform, what you're really saying is you don't care about the people who listen to them. And those folks deserve to know that there are politicians and political pathways that are honest and direct about the insanity of this war, that are honest and direct about the corporate corruption of our politics, that are honest and direct about the need to provide people healthcare in this country. So, I think they thought that they could come for us. They thought that I would back down. They thought that they could cancel a whole swath of voters whose voices, frankly, they want to shut out of the conversation. And then they effed around and found out.
Hasan in the streamer world is really models this progressive feminist version of what it means to be a man. And this is ironic given the way that they portray him, and a jacked weightlifting bro kind of guy at that. And you've articulated similar thoughts about, in terms of communicating directly with men about a different way to relate to masculinity. What's your diagnosis with what's going on with men and boys in this country, and how you think the left should be approaching it?
Well, there's a structural one and there is a cultural one. Structurally, let's not forget that we all live in a hyper-corporatist type of capitalism where huge sectors, trillions of dollars, get made and weaponized against men's dopamine circuits. There's a good friend of mine. Our whole relationship it basically comprises of discussions about Detroit athletes of the 80s and 90s. And my guy can't watch ESPN anymore because ESPN has basically become a sports betting platform. And this is a big part of his life that's basically off limits to him because we've allowed the fusing of corporate media, and the gaming industry, all existing to weaponize men's dopamine circuits to take their money. Then you think about gaming, then you think about porn. If you're 14 years old and you're on Instagram, chances are you're being fed, softcore pornography that's 2 clicks away from actual pornography. And that's not to say that any of these things should not be allowed. That is to say that we need to put some real thought into whether or not we want young people or people who have problematic gambling to constantly have to be exposed to this. Why? So that a huge industry can make billions of dollars. That's the structural part. And when too often men find themselves at the wrong end of the dopamine high, and they feel terrible about themselves in the moment, then you have the sort of quote unquote masculinity industrial complex, the Andrew Tates of the world, right there to blame it on a woman. And I think the version of masculinity I was raised with was the idea that any strength you might have over anyone should be used to empower them, not to hurt them. And so if that's physical strength or cognitive strength or you name it, right? That your job is to figure out how to use that to serve people, that's the job. And I think if we're serious about taking on the crisis, then we've got to be serious about two things. A, you can't just label all masculinity toxic, because all you're doing is driving people back into the arms of the Andrew Tates, who are willing to tell them that they're just fine as it is and the real problem is somebody else. B, you have to be able to demonstrate that kind of benevolent masculinity. And you need to empower those voices who can speak equally to men and also speak to men about what our responsibilities look like. So put your pants on, go to the gym, go to class, speak respectfully to the people around you, and figure out how you become a positive member in society. But also, a lot of this is not exactly your fault. There are huge corporations who exist specifically to weaponize your dopamine circuits against you and frankly against all of society. And we have a real responsibility to be able to stand up to them and put calipers upon where, when, and how these kinds of products can be offered, how to protect kids, right? Very, very young men, pre-men, right? And to protect everybody else from the kind of problematic addictions that can arise for any of these things. And so I think we've got to be thinking structurally, and we've got to be thinking culturally, and we've got to be able to tie those things together.
One of the most interesting, important things about left politics in the U.S. right now is the increasing intersection between Arab American and Muslim American communities and the political left. It goes back to Keith Ellison, Rashida Ilan, then Zohran, and of course, with yourself. Not only are Arab and Muslim communities increasingly organized and increasingly a key part of the left, those communities have also become a financial powerhouse in races like New York City. 2 decades ago, CAIR estimated, the Council on American Islamic Relations, estimated that a huge majority of Muslims voted for Bush. Then, for decades after 9/11, we had a country consumed by right-wing Islamophobia that painted both Arabs and Muslims as violent, backward reactionaries. But here we are today in a pretty remarkable place. What do you make of this arc with this important place of Arabs and Muslims at the center of a reviving, ascendant U.S. left?
Part of that is, in Muslim culture, there is a real commitment to integrity. The sword that the Prophet, peace be upon him, used to carry said, "Speak the truth even if it be against yourself." Right? There is a real commitment to integrity that is sewn into the fabric of Muslim belief. And then American Muslims have often lived on the wrong side of the worst excesses of the proto-MAGA movement, now the real MAGA movement. You think about the wars that have been fought in our name. You think about the legalized system of surveillance that is as anti-American as it gets. Those things have often targeted Muslims. And so it is a response, a logical response that the Arab and Muslim community has said, okay, well, we came here in the generations before us believing in the ideals of this country, right? Ideals that we hold deeply sacred. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, all people, It should say, are created equal. Government of the people, by the people, and for the people, often leaving countries where those things didn't exist. And then to find yourself the victim of a culture that is weaponizing against those ideals, right? If you're somebody who takes integrity seriously, you're going to step up and be like, no, like our job is to be the America we say we are. And then you've got, generations like mine who were born and raised here that like we are as American as anyone else, right? Apple pie with maybe a little bit more cardamom. But that responsibility to stand up and say, we've got to fight back against the forces that are weaponizing government against all of us, right? And that's the thing is, if you've been thrown under the bus enough times, you start to get to know the people under the bus and you start to realize that no, but none of us should be under the bus. So what happens when all of us, working people, come up and step up together, fighting for the integrity that should be the foundation of this country in the first place? And as I've said so many times, it doesn't matter how you pray, where your family comes from, who you love, how you identify, that you need a good roof over your head, you need to be able to afford groceries, you need to be able to send your kid to a good school, and you need healthcare. And so this is about more than any one identity, more than any one faith perspective. But maybe it takes communities who have been ground down, told that in a country where we believe in freedom of religion, that you can't actually, pray a certain kind of way, or being told that you're less than, when you can then build a movement of people all coming together and saying, well, you're under the bus for who you love. You're under the bus because you can't afford a dignified life. You're under the bus because they're discriminating against you because of the color of your skin. You're under the bus because they're discriminating against you for how you pray. Why don't all of us get out from underneath the bus and actually build a bus that is worthy of the ideals of this country? And I think that's where you're starting to see some of that. And so I'm not running to be the first Muslim anything. I am running because my belief in this country and its ideals, and my belief in my own faith, suggest that we have a responsibility to stand up for justice and the ideals of this country, and to lead in a moment where too often people are told that they're not enough. And that leaves us with this sort of white nationalist movement that is now dominating our politics and telling us that the best use of our collective money isn't to provide our kids healthcare and to provide our kids good schools, but instead to go drop bombs on other people and their kids. And I think there's a collection of people of all faiths, of all backgrounds, who are coming together around those ideals to push back. And it's not surprising to me that you've got a good representation of Arabs and Muslims in that mix, alongside atheists and agnostics and Christians and Jews and Buddhists and Hindus, all fighting for the same goal, that none of us want to be under the bus. All of us want to be able to afford our lives, and all of us deserve that this country holds itself to that standard. And the last point I'll make here is that, like, I love America. I know exactly what my life would have been but for America. I used to spend a lot of my childhood summers basically with a front row seat to what my life should have been but for America. I just want America to be America for all of her children. And I think that's true for all of us, regardless of how we come to this.
We have a lot of organizers who listen to this podcast. To close out, tell us about what your campaign looks like as an operation, as an organizing project.
Yeah. So now I come from the background of building and leading government agencies. I take rigor really, really seriously. But then a great mission is one that is about bringing people together to see themselves in a movement. And at its best, that's what our campaign is about. We've got a great team of leaders who've come from a number of different backgrounds, but we're building an organizing structure that I think is going to change the face of American politics. I'm hoping that some of those organizers who are listening will come and get involved. But we're building a kind of classic snowflake model. Michigan is a huge state with 10 million people in it. And the thing that I always remind our organizing team, and our organizing team has sort of inscripted on its heart, is the notion that people come for a candidate, but they stay for each other. And the most powerful story that somebody can tell is their own, right? So I'm not interested in feeding folks scripts about our campaign. I want them to know what we're fighting for, and some of the key policy planks of the campaign, sure. But the most powerful thing that somebody can bring to organizing is their own story and about why they're a part of this. And our job is to create a platform for people to share their own story with each other, to build a movement of people who see their story etched in the tapestry of what we're trying to do. Michigan, as everybody knows, sits in the carotid artery of American politics. So if we can empower people to tell their own story, to change our politics here, we can empower people to tell their own stories to change our politics everywhere. And that's exactly what we intend to do going into August and then going into November. And then, be rigorous, right? Make sure that the nuts and bolts of a campaign are well executed. And then for me to make sure that I am constantly a receptacle of other people's experiences and their pain. And the thing that we do best in political movements is we can take pain and turn it into purpose. That's my job, is to be someone who people feel comfortable and confident bringing their pain to, because they believe together that we're building a platform that can turn that pain into collective purpose. And it's the thing I loved best about my work in medicine and healthcare. It's the thing I love best about my work in politics. And I hope that folks will join us. If folks are interested and excited about it, I hope that folks will go to abdulforsenate.com and get involved. But it really has been exciting. It's been such a joy and a journey. And I'll tell you, I'm forever, I ran for governor back in 2018, and for 8 years, I didn't get the opportunity to do this work. And I get to do it now. And I'm just so grateful for what people have poured into us. And I hope that they'll come and get involved.
Well, Abdul El-Sayed, thank you very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
That was Abdul El-Sayed, a candidate for U.S. Senate in Michigan. In other news, if you missed my debate over the whole Hasan controversy on the Brian Lehrer show a few weeks back, I put a link in the show notes. I'm not going to be humble here. I absolutely destroyed my opponent from Third Way. It's worth a listen. Next up is Tennessee State Representative Justin Pearson, a Justice Democrat-backed candidate running for a U.S. House seat in Tennessee, a Memphis area seat that the Tennessee legislature effectively eliminated through a gerrymander on the very day we conducted our interview. After the Supreme Court recently all but gutted what remained of the Voting Rights Act, Tennessee Republicans moved to effectively eliminate the state's only Democratic majority black district by redrawing it so it was neither Democratic nor majority black. Pearson's team is currently fighting in court, but the far right's all-out anti-democratic assault on black political power in the South, it's a reminder that to truly set things right in this country, we must ultimately undertake transformative change at the depth and on the scale of a long ago sabotaged reconstruction. Representative Justin Pearson, welcome to The Dig.
Thank you so much, Dan. So glad to be here with you.
The Supreme Court just gutted what remained of the Voting Rights Act, giving a green light to Southern Republicans to eliminate majority black voting districts through gerrymandering, and Tennessee Republicans just called a special session, which started today, we're talking on Tuesday, May 5th, in order to construct a gerrymander that eliminates the majority black Memphis district that you are running to represent right now. I mean, it's just an unreal level of outrageousness. How are you organizing to fight back on this attempt to destroy black political power in the South, an attempt to eliminate the very district you're running to represent in Congress? What does that tell you? What does that tell all of us about the depth of the political struggle that we have to wage, not just to win a particular election, but to democratize a fundamentally anti-democratic system in this country?
Yeah. I mean, what this moment calls us to is a moment of revolution. And it's not just a revolution of values. It's a revolution of understanding how systems operate, how they function, and how white supremacy has undergirded these institutions and continues to show up over and over and over again, from Supreme Court decisions to executive orders of this administration to the legislation that gets pushed by people in state houses, commissions, city councils all across the state, all across our country, quite frankly. But what we are experiencing in Tennessee very acutely right now is how racism is taking away way, the only black majority district in the entire state. It's the only district that has ever sent a member of Congress to the United States House of Representatives who was black or African American. It's the district that I'm currently running in and that I currently serve in the House of Representatives in District 86. So the political moment that we are in is seeing the destruction of our democracy, because what ultimately could happen is nearly at least a dozen elected officials who serve in the United States Congress in the South will see their seats taken. Next year or over the coming months, we'll see the greatest purge of black political representation in American history since at least the period of retribution began after the era of Reconstruction, with over 200 elected officials who serve in the state houses of representatives or the state senates all across the South having their districts redrawn in order that white folks can create white majority districts and take away black representation. To say that this moment that we are in is one of the most consequential of our lifetime really feels like an understatement. Our democracy is quite literally being stolen by people who are pushing an ideology of white supremacy and authoritarianism right into the president's plan for our country and for his benefit.
You and your brother co-founded Memphis Communities Against Pollution, originally Memphis Communities Against the Pipeline, in order to fight back against a pipeline that was going to get built through the black working class neighborhood that you grew up in and where you live today. How did you first become active in movement work, and how did you manage to win that fight to stop the pipeline?
Yeah, before I knew the words movement work, you can go back to when I was just 15 years old in high school and we were denied textbooks. And I knew that was wrong because I went to a high school just the year before who had so many access to resources, you wouldn't be able to believe it. And so when we were deprived of those resources, my brother Tim and I went to the same high school, we realized that we were being deprived access to textbooks, teachers in certain classrooms, and resources strictly because the school was black. 99.9% black, and was overall in a poor district. And so we weren't getting the care and the concern. So I went to the school board, demanded that we get access to textbooks and resources. And over the next couple of days, 2 18-wheelers worth of trucks pulled up to the school. We got new teachers, we got a new principal, we got advanced placement courses, honors courses, and I was obviously able to go to a good liberal arts college, same one that Zoran graduated from, and ultimately become the person that I am today after that investment. 6 years ago, when this pipeline fight began, it was the height of the pandemic. We were dealing with the racial reckoning of the Black Lives Matter movement and the movement for Black life to be considered to be valued. And the fight against the crude oil pipeline, the Haley Connection pipeline, really showed this intersectionality. Our lives are being taken systematically in so many different ways. And we talked about it, my brother Keyshawn and I have talked about this a lot. You have the immediacy of death that comes from police brutality, which we know too intimately in our community through the deaths of people like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Mr. Tyree Nichols. But we also have the effect of slow lynchings that occur in our communities when black folks are disproportionately placed near facilities and polluting facilities that's shortening our lives, causing COPD, asthma, heart attacks, high blood pressure, due to environmental racism and what Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali has called sacrifice zones. And so to resist against this crude oil pipeline, we built a coalition of neighborhood organizations, environmental justice and climate justice organizations, all the way to the point where we got Al Gore to come into our community and rally alongside us. But it was rooted in people first. Black folk who were having their land stolen and taken by a corporation misusing eminent domain, organizing across race, across difference to build what Heather McGee, some of us calls the solidarity dividend that ultimately led to our victory. Legal strategy, communication strategy, community organizing strategy. It's a similar thing that we're doing right now to preserve and fight for our district representation in the State House as a state representative.
Today, Elon Musk has built 2 data centers in the area to power Grok. And those data centers, in turn, they're powered by gas turbines that generate a ton of pollution. What has that fight been like in Memphis? And what do you think the solution is on a national level, at a federal level, that we need to push for so that these localized struggles against big tech can be addressed in a comprehensive manner, that we don't have to keep waging these fights data center by data center, community by community? Or, another way to ask it, I guess, is how do those data center by data center community by community fights, how do they add up to a national movement that gets the comprehensive solution we need?
Yeah, I think about this in two ways. One, quite literally, these data centers, Elon Musk included, pollution is killing us. We know through research that's been done by Harvard researchers that in their second plant, where they're expected to use at least 41 gas turbines, that dozens of people are going to prematurely die every year. The cost being hundreds of millions of dollars in economic loss from the number of hospital visits and hospitalizations that are to occur, the loss of productivity from people not being able to go to work or having to take their kid to the hospital due to respiratory illnesses. Hundreds of millions of dollars in cost lost in our community due to one data center that's using 41 gas turbines. And this is happening all over the country and all over the world. And so we can think that the consequences of this will ultimately be to the tune of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who die prematurely. And because these places are typically sited in areas that already have folks with comorbidities, which we saw with COVID, folks who already had illnesses, the additional harm likely to be created by data centers and their pollution is ultimately going to lead to more people dying who otherwise would be alive if the data centers and their polluting facilities and power plants were not put in our communities. And so let's just be very real here. And the reason that the fight is so strong, I think, in Memphis, in South Haven, across our country, is because we're talking about people's access to clean air and clean water and land that they have been and their families have stewarded for hundreds of years, and the Native Americans have obviously stewarded for thousands of years. So that's the real problem, that the human cost of a technology, of a computer, is our death. That's what we're being told to exchange for Grok to be able to send explicit images of children and women and victims of assault to people who now pay for it. We're told to pay in our lungs and in our lives. And so that's why I think you're starting to see a national push here. But let me praise God for the angelic dissenters and the activists and the organizers and the advocates and the elected officials who try to have a little bit of a backbone in standing up to big tech and their money that they're now spending into campaigns, over $200 million in congressional campaigns thus far, all across the country, them trying to buy elections because they can't convince the public on why it's necessary for some technology to be able to write your email and for you to be able to lose your water and also lose your air for that benefit. These communities go across the political spectrum. Republicans, Democrats, independents, libertarians all realize that we are being told to become slaves to the artificial intelligence, big tech conglomerates and oligarchs for their profits and to put our needs second. The things that we need to actually live, we are being told to put second. This is horrible. But the movement and the momentum that we're getting in all these towns, in all these communities, even where data centers are not just being proposed, but have passed, and then the next week, people are firing, in essence, the elected officials who passed it. That's what's giving me hope. That's what makes me think that what Senator Bernie Sanders, what Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are proposing with the moratorium is what we need to do in this moment in time. And anyone who calls himself a Democrat and has not signed on to that legislation needs to be challenged, needs to be primaried, needs to lose their election, needs to make sure we don't give a single dollar to. Because if you do not support a moratorium on death-creating machines and entities, there's no way you should be a Democrat because you don't believe what we believe, which is that our main responsibility is not to the profits of corporations, is not to the benefit of the billionaires, it is to the protection and the benefit and the well-being of the communities that we represent and have the privilege to represent.
In 2023, you and two of your Tennessee House colleagues became celebrities across liberal and progressive America when a protest you made against gun violence on the House floor led to you being expelled from your seats by Republican leadership. You got your seat back after you were reinstated by local officials, and then you won it back again at the ballot box. What was that experience like for you as a young activist legislator? And how do you think about gun violence in this country and how it connects to all the other issues that we on the left are always fighting around, issues like economic justice, imperialist warfare, police brutality, mass incarceration, environmental destruction?
I mean, April 6, 2023 was one of the hardest days that I'd had as an elected official because I watched how democracy was quite literally crumbling before our eyes on behalf of a white supremacist agenda that wanted to silence the voices of the two youngest Black elected lawmakers in the entire state of Tennessee and silence the communities that we represent. My district, which is majority Black African American folks, was completely silenced. 72,000 folks didn't have representation because a majority white Republican legislature decided that they didn't deserve it because their representative actually started to speak up and stand up against the issues that they cared about. In Memphis and Shelby County is one of the most beautiful, beloved places in the world, but gun violence is a real problem. My classmate that year had been killed due to gun violence. The fall before, my mentor, Dr. Yvonne Nelson, had been killed due to gun violence. Personally, in our family, we've been impacted by the tragic loss and suicide of our brother, my older brother, my other brother's younger brother. We know that our communities are suffering desperately for solutions. And we know that 71% of the people in the state of Tennessee, Republicans and Democrats, including MAGA Republicans, want to see gun safety laws that make sense. The work that this legislature has been doing to make it easier for people to access firearms has led to more deaths. And in fact, the research shows that in states that have less strict gun safety laws, on average, 500 kids die every single year who otherwise would be alive. And so it was very painful to go through the process of expulsion and see how far people are willing to go to solidify their power and these ideologies that they're somehow better than everybody else and that the National Rifle Association and all these gun manufacturers need not ever be challenged. But especially not challenged by young people, especially not challenged by young Black people, especially not challenged by young Black educated people. That's the message that they were trying to send. And the message that my constituents sent back was that that is the exact type of representation that we need in this moment in time. And now, as their next effort to destroy our democracy, they're trying to destroy the only Black majority district in the entire state house. Right? We have to realize that this is a part of a pattern that these folks have been on for a very, very, very long time. And let's be honest, the intersection of these injustices are not accidental. The places that have the most gun violence, the places that are the most polluted, the places that have the least economic opportunity and resources are all the same communities. They're all the same communities. And the system has yet to change in order to meaningfully address those problems. And that system, if we're going to be honest together, has been run by Democrats and also Republicans. That system that has a Boeing put money in the pockets of people who are Democrats, who the Democrats on paper say they're against war, but their stock trades show that they're getting profits. Those Republicans who say, you know what, I don't think we should do this. But then you look at who is funding their accounts and the corporate PACs. It's the same people who they're speaking against, which makes people not trust the democratic process. It makes people not believe that any politicians are different because the messages are quite confusing. When on one hand, you say we need to abolish ICE, but on the other hand, we look at your stock portfolio and you've got stocks in the very contractors who are making the detention centers. We're being lied to. We're being lied to by people who are in these positions of power. And that's why we have to have new voices. That's why we have to have new leadership. That's why we have to have new energy in every level of government, from mayor to the state house, to the governors, to the Congress and to the White House, because we don't have time for this system to continue to operate the way that it is, because we know that it is rigged against poor people. It's rigged against working class people. It's rigged against immigrant communities and Black people and women. And if we don't have folks who are willing to be honest and tell truth about the intersectional harm that is happening by the status quo, oftentimes, regardless of who's in power, we're never going to change it.
To close out, I wanted to ask you, how was it that Justice Democrats went about recruiting you to run for this seat? Was it an easy sell, something you imagined doing? Did you need some convincing? How did you decide to take the plunge into such an intense fight?
Yeah, I appreciate you recognizing the intensity. This is a hard fight. We're going up against a 20-year incumbent. He's got $2 million from corporate PACs. We said we're not taking any corporate PAC money. He's got $10 million from trading stocks in Congress. I don't have any stocks to trade at all. All right, my family is taking on the stress of this because we feel we're called in this moment to provide that new energy, new leadership, and new experiences to actually move the needle on the issues that are deeply impacting our community. You know, we've got a couple of grants and things like that, like every other congressional district has gotten, but the needle hasn't moved on the big issues that people want to address, whether it be veterans getting hundreds of millions of dollars, gun violence, which is the number one killer of children in our communities, a minimum wage that needs to be raised to $25 an hour. We have not seen the needle move on any of those things. And so the Justice Democrats had to come to me twice. The first time I was like, y'all, I'm okay. I'm doing this work in the state house. I'm good. I appreciate it. And they had flown down, and I felt bad about it. But they're persistent, politely persistent people, and the issues just have become so much more stark. And the lack of leadership, this very passive leadership that I'm seeing from our own incumbent, is really distressing. When people think all I have to do is send a newsletter and do a press conference and send out a press release, and that's the job. I don't have to use the power of this office to actually meaningfully do anything. I don't have to campaign. I don't have to hold town halls. This guy hasn't held a town hall since August, right? We've held, I think, a dozen town halls since August. Like, people are complacent and they are not fighting for us. And because people do not fear the fight, they know that they can take advantage of us. And that's what has to change. Republicans across the South in this country should be terrified that we're going to speak up, united in one voice, to fight against the tyranny of government, which is exactly what we are experiencing. And when people have that "do not tread on me" flag, I'm like, that should be one of the banners of the Democratic Party, because we are seeing what happens when a white supremacist uses and weaponizes the office of the presidency to tread on our rights. When the Department of Justice is being targeted against his so-called political enemies, we are seeing what happens when ICE is able to kill people in cold blood, and we are told that we're not able to investigate at the state level. And yet we've had Democrats thanking ICE and giving Customs and Border Patrol billions and billions of dollars, even before Donald Trump got there. We've got to be honest about where we are. And just seeing all of those problems really propelled me and my family to say, now is the moment. Now is the time. We appreciate everybody's service and years of service, but this is a different moment. This is a different era, and we have to have somebody different to be able to fight and stand up for us and go for us into battle. So that's how we got here.
Well, Representative Justin Pearson, thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan.
That was Tennessee State Representative Justin Pearson, a Justice Democrats-backed candidate running for a U.S. House seat in Tennessee, a Memphis area seat that Tennessee Republicans just effectively gerrymandered out of existence after the U.S. Supreme Court gutted what remained of the Voting Rights Act. Next up is Darializa Avila Chevalier, a Justice Democrats recruited and NYC DSA endorsed candidate challenging sitting U.S. Congressman Adriano Espaillat in New York City's 13th District. Darializa Avila Chevalier, welcome to The Dig.
Thanks so much for having me.
What was the path in life that took you to this moment you're at right now, running an insurgent left-wing campaign for the U.S. House of Representatives, and more specifically, wherever it was that you were at in your life last year when you made that decision, how was it that Justice Democrats successfully talked you into running?
Yeah, I actually never thought that I would run for office. I come from community organizing, and that's what I've been doing my entire adult life. I grew up in a working class Dominican immigrant family. I saw my family navigate the immigration system. I had the opportunity to visit Palestine when I was 20, and that really was a really formative experience for me. And also have seen so much of my community be impacted by mass incarceration. So these were the issues that I was really organizing around for most of my adult life, and the things that I felt really passionately about. And in February of last year, I started knocking on doors for the mayoral primary because I was at a really low point where I felt that I'd done everything I knew how to do as an organizer, and there was still an ongoing genocide. And so I saw through knocking on doors and going back to the basics of talking to my neighbors, that there was a really incredible opportunity to use electoral politics as a vehicle for mobilizing our communities again on the issues that deeply matter to us, issues that are all interconnected, right? Issues that at their core have to do with valuing human life and dignity. And so, I've had a sense for a really long time that the incumbent Espaillat was very weak and was deeply unpopular here in this district. not just because of the way he's failed this community on Palestine, but because of the way that he's been absent on so many of these issues. And so when Justice Democrats reached out to me and told me that I'd been nominated by my community, I knew that I had to take this opportunity seriously and really think about it, even though running for office was not something that I had on my bingo card. But it was the thing that my community was pushing me to do. And it's how they were asking me to show up in this moment. And we're in a moment now where we're facing fascism. It's at our door, and it's going to require so much more bravery from every single one of us to be able to defeat it and to save our democracy. And I knew that I could not ask that of others if I myself wasn't willing to be brave in this moment and take that step. So that's how I got to this decision, and I'm just so deeply grateful to everyone who's supported me and guided me through this. Everyone on my team, all the volunteers, and just the thousands of people who have been really supportive of this campaign.
Espaillat has often been portrayed as a real Manhattan political institution that would seemingly be rather hard to topple. What convinced you that he was vulnerable, and how are you making the case to voters in a district that includes neighborhoods like Harlem, Washington Heights, Inwood?
I've always had the sense that folks here did not find him to be fighting for us in the way that we deserve here in this district. And that sense was even more magnified during the mayoral primary, where, I was talking to my neighbors about what they wanted to see out of their politics. And the name that would come up most often after Cuomo as an example of a politician who has failed us was Espaillat. I knew he was deeply unpopular because of I've reached out to his office over the course of my organizing, right, and never gotten a response. It actually wasn't until we launched our campaign that I finally got a response from his office about anything. He turned away my friend Mahmoud Khalid's family when his family was seeking his support. He turned away our friends when they sought his support to help get Mahmoud out of ICE detention. And I've just known for quite some time, right, that he has been an example of leadership that has been absent from this district. And so when I saw the numbers after the mayoral primary, where Espaillat had endorsed Cuomo, but the district went towards Zoran by 19 points, I knew that this was like a measure of what I had sensed on the ground for so long. And, I think a lot of folks had initially dismissed this district as one that would just go with whoever the establishment representative was. But I had a sense that if we told people that there was a primary happening and that there was another option on the ballot, that they would take the risk and go with the person who was actually fighting for working people. And we saw that in the primary, where Zoran won by 19 points, and then we saw that again in the general, where he won by, I believe it was 34 points. So, I think that really highlighted that folks were willing to come out to the polls in droves in a district that has historically had significantly low voter turnout, when folks were given an option that gave them hope that there was somebody who would fight for them.
Has Zoran's victory, has it made a socialist message more viable, even more just like common sense or normal among the voters whose support you need to win?
I think so. I think a lot of the folks who live in this district who maybe wouldn't have identified as a socialist before still had those values, right? I think the way we use these labels has obviously had an impact on how willing people are to identify with them. But when they hear the core value, right, when they hear what it is socialists are fighting for, they're on board. And that's because this is a working class district. This is working class people of color who live here, who would benefit greatly from the policies that socialism and democratic socialism are putting forth. And also, I think the fact that we as socialists are so open about our willingness to fight for these things and not just wait for them to one day maybe happen or make excuses for why they're not happening has been a refreshing change of pace for a lot of people. I think, we've also seen that people who are giving us something to fight for is what drove people to come out to the polls to begin with, right? We saw record turnout last year during the mayoral primary, and we know that in past elections, Espaillat benefited from the historically low turnout in these primaries and elections. And so we know who came out last year, right? We're talking to them. We know that there was a historic turnout among young people in particular in last year's election, and that there was a historic turnout in 2020 when there was greater access to the ballot because of vote by mail that was happening during the pandemic, where folks voted or essentially participated in a protest vote and voted for candidates other than Espaillat who didn't have a meaningful infrastructure. And still, they were willing to take a chance on names they didn't know because they felt so dissatisfied with the kind of leadership that Espaillat was giving us. Zoran's race showed New Yorkers that socialism is rooted in care, that it's rooted in community values, that it's about standing up for human dignity and for what's right. And, now we have an amazing slate of socialist electeds and candidates who are pushing the envelope even further and making sure that we are showing not just the city, but this country that last year was not a fluke, that these are the values that our community cares about and wants to fight for. And that they aren't radical. These are the basic principles of what it means to live with human dignity. It's time that we stop putting in politicians who only vote in the interests of corporations and start voting in politicians who actually fight for the working people of our district.
My sense is that Espaillat has really tried to drive a wedge between the Black and Dominican communities that are such major parts of your district. How are you building coalitions across the differences that make up a district that's Black, Dominican, white, and also, of course, all sorts of other people?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a proud Afro-Latina. I am a proud Afro-Latina organizer. And I really do think that these differences are manufactured by politicians who benefit from these divisions. To me, what I see are artificial divisions that are created for the sake of profit for the corporations that are funding these types of politicians, when so many of us are struggling with the very same issues. What we see at the doors time and time again is that people are struggling with issues of housing. They're struggling with immigration. They're struggling with the cost of living and the cost of raising a child in the city. And so, our platform and our politics are about making sure that we're addressing those concerns, which transcend race and ethnicity, but are also at their core issues of racial justice. When I was teaching at Lehman, one of my classes on Intro to Sociology was on Introduction to Race and Ethnicity. And, I would explain to my students that the history of race is a history of labor, that the history of racial justice is also a history of economic justice. And if we're addressing those things, we need to do it in a way that's encompassing of the various forms of injustice that Black and Brown communities in this district have been impacted by this capitalist project, right? And making sure that we are advancing economic justice just as much as we're advancing racial justice. And I think when we have politicians whose interests are rooted in corporate greed, who are fighting on behalf of corporations and special interest lobbies and not on behalf of the communities that make up this district, a historically Black and Brown district, right? Then obviously what we're going to see is greater tensions among these groups that aren't real. They're manufactured entirely by the interests of these corporations and special interest groups.
You were a leader in the Columbia student encampments against the genocide in Gaza, and as you referenced earlier, you organized alongside Mahmoud Khalil, who also lives in your district, and you organized for his freedom after he was abducted by ICE, while the incumbent who you're challenging did nothing at all, at least nothing positive. What role does Palestine play in your politics and in this race, and how do you connect the dots between Palestinian liberation and the everyday issues faced by Black and Latino working class New Yorkers?
Yeah, for me, Palestine makes one question in particular very clear, and that's, do you value human life or do you not? And if you are somebody who sees the lives of Palestinians as expendable, then you probably also see my life as an Afro-Latina. And this is a district, again, that is made up predominantly of people of color, of Black and brown people. While there's a lot of diversity here at its core, this is a question of human dignity. Do you value life? And that question is going to seep into every policy decision that our representatives make. I was arrested. I've been arrested now twice, right? Organizing to end the genocide in Palestine. And I'm not ashamed of that. I would do it again. Because for me, there is nothing more sacrosanct than human life and dignity. And we need to make sure that our budgets, our policies, our laws, all of these things are reflective of that value, and that we're fighting for human life and dignity in every level of government. The same forces that are funding the occupation in Palestine are also the same forces that are displacing Black and brown people who live here in Uptown in the Bronx. It's the same forces who allow or who share this worldview that capital and money can just be used to displace people for the sake of more capital and more money. And that's something that I entirely reject. These are communities here, many of whom have been here for generations and are getting uprooted because of this corporate greed and because of these foreign interests. And, I reject that completely.
Well, Darializa Avila Chevalier, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
That was Darializa Avila Chevalier, a Justice Democrats recruited, NYC DSA endorsed candidate challenging sitting U.S. Congressman Adriano Espaillat in New York City's 13th district. Next up, Portland, Oregon DSA is an absolute powerhouse, controlling 4 of 12 council seats in the city. They're currently running Tammy Carpenter for the state legislature for House District 27 in the suburb of Beaverton. If she wins, Tammy will become Oregon's 5th socialist state legislator. Here's retired anesthesiologist Dr. Tammy Carpenter. Dr. Tammy Carpenter, welcome to The Dig.
Thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here.
I want to start by asking you where your race fits into the broader socialist project in Oregon. DSA has a number of people on Portland's city council, where it exercises quite a bit of power, and in the state house, I believe 4 legislators. What has it meant for DSA to exercise so much power at the city level in Portland? And what then might it look like to build out a real caucus of DSA legislators at the state level, a socialists in office group that moves in a coordinated fashion?
The Portland DSA chapter has been all in on city council. Firstly, helping to get 4 DSA members elected with the new form of government in the city of Portland. And then, after they won those races, supporting those candidates in the work that they were doing, the work of the people, for the people. And it's been really inspiring. I sit just outside of the city of Portland, here in the first ring of suburbs, Beaverton, Oregon. And it is true that we have 4 DSA members in this state house. And thus far, the chapters across the state haven't been leaning into that as a source of change, a source of power. And it's relatively new that there are 4 DSA members. My dear friend, longtime friend, Representative Farah Chaichi, has been a member. I joined in 2017 after Trump was first inaugurated. I think she joined around then. And she's been the lonely DSA person in Salem, Oregon. And as the excitement around democratic socialism has shifted here in Oregon and across the country, people have joined. Representative Mark Gamba joined recently. Representative Travis Nelson has been a dues-paying member for a while, but is leaning in. And then State Representative Leslie Munoz in her freshman term recently joined as well. So there's 4, hopefully 5 shortly. And it's new that there's going to be that much energy, that number of people. So as a Portland chapter, the folks in the Socialist in Office Committee are starting to think about what it will look like to support their DSA members in the State House, and realizing we have to build out a statewide Socialist in Office committee. So there's a lot of enthusiasm around that, what that looks like, not only to help us get elected, but to help support us and to pass the policy goals that we have once we're in office. And that will take a statewide coordinated effort, which is new, which we are building as we speak. And there's a lot of enthusiasm for it as we talk about how we build capacity. My race in particular, I'm the first cadre candidate endorsed by the chapter. I'm not sure if that's a distinction made across the country. And
definitely,
the commitment goes both ways. And so right now, helping me to get elected, we have knocked on 13,000 doors at our first pass, which is unheard of in a state, in a election for State House. And we've started our second pass. In the first weekend alone of our second pass, we knocked on 2,000 doors because of DSA members committed to this campaign are showing up. This is what we're hoping to build, is not only elected socialists in office, we are also building the movement as we go.
Can you say a little bit more about what has it looked like for DSA to exercise the power that it's built on the city level in Portland? I lived and organized in Portland about 20 years ago, and it's long had a robust left political culture and organizing scene, but the idea of socialists being a bloc on city council 20 years ago wasn't even kind of on the agenda.
So the Socialist in Office Committee that exists in the chapter right now meets regularly with the staff of each elected city councilor, understanding not only their policy goals, but bringing policy to them. And I haven't been as involved in the work that they're doing in the city. And I will tell you that the times that I have gone to a city council meeting to show solidarity with the city council members as they are pushing for true progressive change in the city, DSA turns out dozens. They turn out 100 people to come to these city council meetings, to be in that space, to speak to the other city councilors. So it is truly a flex. The DSA is showing that they can and will show up. They have also, some of the stuff that we've done, that they've done in Portland is the Preschool for All tax. It was a Tax the Rich initiative born out of DSA that taxed, the rich people in Multnomah County, where the city of Portland resides. And they were so successful in passing this that we are trying to emulate that across the state. And it came out of the DSA. So I'm really hopeful that as we have been growing DSA, for a moment, we were the fastest growing chapter in the country. I don't know if that is still the case, but we're growing because of our wins. We're growing because of the success that we have had on city council, the success we've had passing the Preschool for All tax and building out that infrastructure for preschool. And there's a lot of enthusiasm, even for my race, as people see a candidate running in the suburbs that is unapologetically talking about tax the rich.
One more clarifying question on this is the Preschool for All, is that was passed at the Multnomah County level, not the city level, is that right?
That's correct. And with Preschool for All, the establishment forces have been trying to tear it down ever since it was passed. The county has been collecting the taxes and building out the infrastructure to have a preschool for every child in Multnomah County. And the money has to come in, and then you have to spend it. And so some of the criticism is like, oh, you've got a lot of money in that bank account that you haven't spent yet. So there's some of that criticism. Our governor has said, oh, we should do preschool for all at the state level. So let's dismantle what you're doing in Multnomah County. The taxes are oppressive. So let's just stop that. But I'm committed to doing preschool for all. I promise, pinky promise.
What's the broader dynamic and balance of power within the Oregon state legislature, both in terms of the balance between Democrats and Republicans, because it's a relatively purple state, and then, I mean, deeper blue in recent years, but historically was relatively purple. And then also the balance of power within the Democratic caucus between the left, both the 4 DSA legislators, but also I assume there's a broader set of progressives more or less alongside them on many issues versus Democratic centrists.
So Oregon is now a blue state. We have a supermajority. The Democrats have a supermajority.
Wow.
in both chambers. We have every statewide elected office.
Wow.
There is one congressperson in Eastern Oregon that is Republican. So we have shifted, and it has been really frustrating to live in a state with a Democratic supermajority and see us fail over and over to pass the people's agenda. So when I talk to my organizations that are supporting me in this race, and here I'm talking about some of our bigger public sector unions, our nurses union, our teachers union, SEIU, they've grown increasingly frustrated with the Democrats. Here in Oregon, we describe them as the mods, the moderate Democrats, but really conservative Democrats have had an outsized say in what happens in the legislature. I think this last biennium was a little bit of a tipping point for them to realize that they need to have true progressives that are ready to throw down for the working class. So the balance within the caucus currently is with the conservative Democrats. And I think that gives, having a Democratic supermajority provides some cover for the more conservative Democrats to say, this is the best we can do. And also we're Democrats, so where else are you going to go? So the ongoing support for the conservative Democrats by corporate interests, by, the uber wealthy, has allowed people living here in Oregon to think this is the best we can do.
Many listeners are no doubt familiar with Portland, but what's going on in Beaverton? Is it harder to run on a socialist platform in the suburbs?
That is a great question, and one we are testing right now. So after the short session, so here in Oregon, we have every year we have a legislative session. We have the long session in odd number years. And then starting maybe 10 years or so ago, we added a short session that is supposed to fill in budget gaps or just tend to things that can't wait until the next session. So after this last 2 sessions, this last biennium, the frustration with not passing a transportation package, that is actually at the heart, I think, of a lot of what people are frustrated with as they watch the legislature. They realize that we need to do something different. So when I started running as an open Democratic socialist, my campaign started at the kitchen table with one of my best friends within DSA, Laura Wadlin. She and I were trying to decide which one of us would run, but we knew we needed to run an open Democratic socialist. So I've been running that way since day one. And we've been testing the water. And as we are knocking on doors and telling people, anybody under 50, I lead with, "Hi, my name is Tammy Carpenter. I'm running for the Oregon House as a Democratic Socialist." Done. They are all in. Anybody over 50, I sometimes lead with values, but the values are, we need to tax the rich so that we can fully fund all the programs we deserve. Also, all in. So it is a little bit surprising. I wasn't sure what that was going to look like when we started actually engaging in voters. And it is overwhelmingly popular. Honestly, I don't even want to suggest that it isn't popular with people over 50. I had a woman, I knocked on her door and she said, "Oh, I'm busy, come back later," which, what person invites somebody to come back later? But she took my lit. And then as she was starting to close the door, she glanced at it, opened the door again and said, "You're a Democratic Socialist? I'm in." So it is honestly surprising how hungry people are for something different. And obviously we're riding on coattails, but it is a perfect time to be running as a Democratic Socialist, even in the suburbs.
You sit on the Beaverton School Board, and after you spoke out against the genocide in Gaza, your colleagues voted to investigate you, an investigation that ultimately cleared you, surprise, surprise, of any wrongdoing because you didn't do anything wrong. How did that play out, and what do you make of this dynamic that we keep seeing of Democratic elected officials trying to silence pro-Palestine voices, even as it's become so abundantly clear that Democratic voters are overwhelmingly opposed to Israel's oppression of Palestinians?
So I first spoke out against the genocide when Israel bombed the first hospital on October 17th, 2023. I felt strongly as a physician that I was obliged to speak out. And I was consistent in my advocacy since then. I signed on to maybe 2 or 3 petitions by the Jewish Voice for Peace chapter here in Portland. Signing that first one in November of 2023 or so definitely got the attention of the Jewish Federation of Portland and other folks that did not like my advocacy. There were calls to my employer. There were calls to the school district. There were vaguely threatening voicemails. But that kind of settled down, and I continued to call out the atrocities. It was in May of 2025, so last year, with the anniversary of Nakba Day. And I shared some posts as stories on my Instagram channel about Nakba Day. That was for people upset about my advocacy. That was what caused them to send in formal complaints against me at the school board. My colleagues did vote to investigate my social media to see if it violated any board policy. The interesting thing is that when my colleagues decided to do that, DSA and JVP said, "Nah, homie." So they organized a rally for me at the next school board meeting. We had about 150 people show up at a school board meeting. Their signs were "Hands off Tammy," free speech, that sort of thing, as well as, stop the genocide. And it was honestly gave me a bigger platform to continue talking about the genocide in ways that I feel like potentially backfired from the goal of those formal complaints. And in fact, my friend Laura Wadlin, she's a common thread through a lot of my work in electoral politics, wrote an article she titled it "The Trick That Doesn't Work Anymore." And it's even more true today that calling somebody anti-Semitic for wanting to end a genocide is not effective anymore. So I haven't seen that come up too much during this campaign. Just in the past week, somebody commented on one of my posts along those lines. So I think that the attack, the response has to be a little bit more subtle. And I actually do anticipate they will say, Tammy doesn't get along with her colleagues. They even voted to investigate her. So that's
without saying why.
Without saying why. I did see a push poll that indicated she doesn't get along with others. So it'll have to be a slightly different tack. And they did set up a PAC that is ready for them to shovel money into when they figure out what direction they want to go with that. And they're probably figuring it out right now.
You have strong support from organized labor, including from unions that I used to work really closely with when I lived and organized in Portland 2 long decades ago. And Portland's labor movement has really for a long time had a strong cohort of left-wing leaders and activists, and in many union locals with a rather left-wing orientation. How would you describe the role of the labor movement in your campaign and more generally in the broader Metro Portland and Oregon socialist project?
So there's been a lot of organizing within locals in the last couple years that have led to significantly more progressive / radical locals. The first time I heard about a caucus within a union was Teamsters for a Democratic Union, and seeing how that brought real democracy to a very large union at the national level. I've started to see that in many locals here. One of the locals, our community college, Portland Community College faculty union, had some elections a couple years ago that brought organizers into leadership that are ready to fight for what they deserve. And we saw the first ever strike at a community college earlier this spring, I guess late winter, 3-week strike. The governor had to hop in, and that grew out of activism and the turn to the left of that union. Again, my friend Laura Wadlin was a part of that. The Beaverton Education Association, the teachers union here, also had an election a couple months ago, bringing in a slate that is composed of several members of DSA. The nurses union at the state level also just won with a slate of true progressives, many DSA members. So I would say that I've seen a shift towards true progressivism among many of our locals and at the state level. And I think that the leadership that I interface with in my campaign aren't necessarily those rank and file. They feel like they have to represent a broad spectrum of views. So there was some tension when they joined the campaign. They joined the campaign after the short session. So let's say February. And we had already knocked on 10,000 doors. We were already doing a lot of work around Tammy Carpenter running as a Democratic Socialist. And they came in and said, hey, can we tone that down a little bit? We are all in on your values, but just maybe not say Democratic Socialist. And so that was a point in the campaign where we had to pause and think about, is this a time that, I just have to quietly be a Democratic Socialist or just keep it under wraps? And to me, that didn't feel true to who I am as a Democratic Socialist. It also didn't work to grow democratic socialism if I'm hiding that part of me. And so my campaign and I had lots of conversations internally, and I just presented to my union partners, this is who I am. And I appreciate the support, love the idea that you're going to be able to spend money on this campaign so that I can win against the establishment candidate. And this is who you signed on with. And I hope that is going to be something that you can get behind and, maybe feel comfortable telling your members about, but that's who I am. And so that's how this is going to go. And they are on board. They said, okay, we do want Tammy Carpenter to pull the caucus to the left. And we might see polling to say otherwise, but Tammy's experience on the doors is that this is a winning message. And so I am curious how that shifts our unions as we get more Democratic Socialists in office. And, many unions by nature are a little bit more conservative. And this is a very interesting opportunity that we're having in this campaign to really have their members be exposed to a candidate that maybe they love and is a Democratic Socialist.
Well, Dr. Tammy Carpenter, thank you very much.
I could not be more happy to spend some time with you, Dan. You do such incredible work. I feel really honored.
I'm honored that you are honored. That was Tammy Carpenter, a Portland DSA-backed candidate for Oregon's House District 27 in the suburb of Beaverton. If she wins, she will become Oregon's 5th socialist state legislator.
I'm Naomi Klein, and you're listening to The Dig, my go-to podcast for the most thoughtful, in-depth conversation on the left. It's an incredible place to be exposed to new ideas and new writing, and if you can, please become a sustaining supporter at Patreon.
This episode of The Dig is brought to you by our listeners, who support us at patreon.com, and by Pluto Press, the independent radical publisher. A new book of Pluto's you might like is How to Sell a Genocide, the Media's Complicity in the Destruction of Gaza. From the host of the Citations Needed podcast, Adam Johnson, comes this gripping expose of how the corporate media fueled genocide in Gaza. Drawing from original, data-driven analysis, Johnson dissects the mechanics of propaganda, from the selective empathy, strategic omissions, overt racism, and repetition of state-sanctioned falsehoods in places like the New York Times, CNN, and MSNBC. Dig listeners can get 50% off their first order of this or any book from Pluto Press using the code DIG50, that's DIG50, at plutobooks.com. Next up, David Morales, a good friend and comrade of mine, running for mayor of my city, Providence, Rhode Island. State Representative David Morales is running first and foremost to address this city's dire housing crisis through rent stabilization and social housing. I'm deeply involved in this campaign as a co-chair of Reclaim Rhode Island, an organization that I've helped build and lead since it was founded out of Bernie 2020. The only public poll to date from Data for Progress has David in the lead over incumbent Mayor Brett Smiley, a close ally of the city's real estate industry, who just shamefully vetoed a rent stabilization ordinance passed by City Council. Representative David Morales, welcome to The Dig.
Dan, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation, my friend.
My two worlds are colliding, my podcast world and my Rhode Island politics world.
It's the crossover episode we have been waiting for.
So you are a socialist running to become the next mayor of Providence, Rhode Island, where we both live. Your challenge is to unseat our current mayor, Brett Smiley, a mayor who is extraordinarily close to the real estate industry and who just vetoed a strong, urgently needed rent stabilization ordinance that was passed by our friends on City Council. What's at stake right now for the city of Providence? How is Smiley running the city? Who is he running it for? And what's your alternate vision?
What's at stake right now in Providence is the question of whether or not working people and families can continue to call the city they love home. We have watched over the last several years as many of our neighbors are just being priced out because the cost of housing is getting too high. Remember recently speaking with a working mom, Lower South Providence, which tends to be a working class community. She watched as her rent skyrocketed from $1,400 for a 2-bedroom to $2,000. And when you put that into comparison of the wages that people earn within our city, folks are being asked to pay far too much in order to live in Providence. And right now we have a mayor that is catered to the interest of big real estate, of corporate landlords, and it shows. You go through campaign finance reports, you see the landlord lobby PACs that are contributing. You see the lobbyists that have contributed directly to him. And for that reason, there's been a lot of opposition that has come from his office that resulted in the veto of the rent stabilization measure that was introduced by the city council, that was well thought, well crafted, and most importantly, reflected years of organizing. Yet that was denied. And so what's at stake here is the future of our city. Our priority is to ensure that Providence is affordable to the working people who want to call our city home. We don't want to see our neighbors get priced out. And so it looks like adopting rent stabilization measures so no one's rent goes up by more than 4% on a given year, building more affordable homes through a public developer model by maximizing underutilized lots and vacant buildings to transform who our city serves. And it shouldn't serve corporate interests. It should serve our neighbors.
Before we get any further, say a little bit about what sort of city Providence is. Who lives here? What makes it special?
Providence is a working class city with over 20 neighborhoods of community members who care for one another. We're tight-knit. We're a city of less than 200,000 people where many neighbors know one another. And it demonstrates itself in the sense that we have so many community organizations, nonprofits, advocacy organizations, and creative artists that call our city home. And what I've often said is that Providence is a city of neighborhoods, where neighbors look out for one another, where community members are, again, oftentimes working jobs that earn them less than 6 figures. And so what we have seen over the last several years is Providence transforming into what is now being seen as the quote-unquote alternative to Boston. And it's scary to watch in real time as it has gotten more expensive and as we start losing that creative spirit because the creative artists, the advocates that make Providence special can no longer afford to continue calling our city home.
You're going to be out fundraised by like a huge amount, even if you raise a lot of money. And you're doing a good job raising money, but you will be out fundraised substantially. What advantages will money give to Smiley, and what's your plan to counter it?
So the traditional advantages we see with money is the ability to send out a lot of mailers, the ability to reach someone without even having to knock on their door because you could afford the postage, you could afford the glossy mail piece. What our advantage is the fact that we have a message that resonates. We have a volunteer network of over 500 community members that have already knocked on doors, made phone calls, written postcards because they feel inspired by the movement that we are building. And it shows. Just recently, we got a poll back from Data for Progress that shows us 11 points ahead of the current mayor because of the fact that we have a message that speaks to affordability, that speaks to using every tool at the city's disposal to protect our immigrant community. Our advantage is the fact that we have a message that resonates because we are not tied to any big corporate donors that are going to dictate our decisions around public policy or budgetary decisions. We're able to speak freely about these progressive issues and do so unapologetically.
You're a left-wing candidate running against someone who likes to present himself, I think, as a non-ideological technocrat, just a mayor who is good at getting basic things done. And, you know, people like me are excited from the get-go. Well, I mean, I've known you for a while, so I was excited from the get-go, but people like me are excited about a candidate like you from the get-go because, you know, I'm an ideologically oriented person. I would love a socialist mayor, but, you know, many voters in Providence or anywhere, they don't see the world through a kind of neat ideological prism. I think for many voters in a city like Providence, they just want city services to function well. How do you counter Smiley on that count?
By being able to demonstrate that we're going to use every tool at our disposal by ensuring that city government is improving the lives of all our neighbors across each and every single neighborhood within Providence. Right now, we have a lot of community members that are feeling frustrated by the current administration. They're feeling frustrated because there's a lack of accountability when it comes to our vendors. The fact that trash pickup is not as consistent as it should be. We had an initial snowstorm back in January where a lot of side streets went unaddressed. You had bus stops that were snowed in, and there was a lack of accountability that came from the city. And so a lot of community members feel like there is a lack of communication and, most importantly, a disconnect between City Hall and our actual needs. Our needs around basic city services like street sweeping, like snow plowing, like ensuring that the trash gets picked up in a timely manner. And so what we're presenting is a city government that would communicate, a city government that would govern based on qualifications and merit. Because right now we have a director of public works that is not qualified to be taking on such an important department that impacts the day-to-day lives of so many of our neighbors. She has no background around city services or traffic engineering, whereas our administration would prioritize layers of qualifications so we're able to deliver on basic issues like consistent street sweeping, and at the same time being able to demonstrate that when we address basic quality of life issues, you can count on us to deliver on big issues related to building more affordable homes.
In New York, looking at Zohran's victory, you see a campaign that started out incredibly strong in what in New York City is called the Commie Corridor, the neighborhoods where NYC DSA membership is most intense, young, left-wing people on day one ready to go for a socialist candidate. And the enormous challenge, one that really seemed insurmountable at the beginning of Zohran's campaign, was to expand that to neighborhoods all across the city. In parallel, in Providence, you're extraordinarily popular in whatever our version of the Commie Corridor is here. But I think you have like a similar challenge. How do you then expand beyond that really rock solid, really fired up base, a truly fired up base? I mean, I think you had like 60 people at the last canvas that I went to. How do you expand beyond that fired up base to neighborhoods where you might not know people as well, where those people might not know Smiley very well either. They might kind of be a little alienated and disconnected from city government entirely.
So our responsibility as a part of this grassroots campaign to build and expand our coalitions. Since we launched back in September of 2025, we have held dozens of community town halls in various spaces. We want to meet community members, whether it's at their local bookstore, at the coffee shop, and have that opportunity to be able to share our vision and, most importantly, answer questions, provide reassurance that there could be a stronger government that exists in the form of actually addressing your basic needs. That yes, government can address issues related to affordability, related to the violation of our neighbors' rights when it comes to immigration enforcement. There are tools that the city can and should be using. And the way we expand that is by having more of these in-person conversations, expanding opportunities for folks to be able to come directly, hear our vision, ask questions, and beyond that, ensuring that our fired up volunteer base, to your point, we had 60 folks at the last canvas, which within Providence standards is a lot of community members coming out to knock doors. And when we are able to have a clear message centered around affordability, improving our schools, improving the quality of city services, and protecting our immigrant neighbors, that's how we continue to build out the coalition. We bring it everywhere. We bring it to our Spanish-speaking community. We bring it to our Cambodian community. We bring it directly to the neighborhoods where we see the highest voter turnout. But at the same time, we're going to make sure that we expand our operations so we're engaging with young people 35 and under who might have voted in a general election back in November, but have never voted in a local election that takes place in September.
There's a lot that you can get done as mayor of a city like Providence, and as you know very well, what we in Reclaim Rhode Island are most excited about is rent stabilization and building out social and publicly owned housing to deal with a housing crisis that's really at the core of what is going very, very wrong with our beautiful city. But there's also a lot that you just can't do as mayor of Providence or anywhere that we need power at the state and federal level to accomplish. So how do you think about what being a successful mayor of our diverse, adorable, artistic, working class city, what would that look like?
In this moment, our neighbors want to see elected leaders that are willing to fight. That are willing to fight and will not back away from the status quo. We're going to use every tool at our disposal to hold fascist ICE agents accountable through our city solicitor's office when we pursue prosecution. We're going to guarantee that we're using all of our agencies at the local level to build publicly owned affordable homes. We're going to increase staffing and support for our students so they have what they need socially, emotionally, and academically. And beyond that, use the office of the mayor as the bully pulpit that will be needed when we go to the State House to make demands about making sure we're taxing the rich, about guaranteeing that we're working towards a public transportation system that serves every community member, that we hold big corporate polluters accountable. It is a responsibility of our capital city to be a leader in these fights. And for too long, Providence has taken the backseat when it comes to discussions that are being made, decisions that are made at the State House. And so we're going to build a movement that goes well beyond this election. We want to get working people to be a part of the process when it comes to committee hearings. Because I am tired, after 6 years of being a state representative, I am tired of just seeing corporate lobbyists be the ones that show up to these hearings, making demands on behalf of their clients. We should be breaking down government and making it more accessible so every community member knows that that is a space where they belong and should be sharing their demands.
I think a lot of people outside of Rhode Island don't pay a ton of attention to Rhode Island. I think that's probably something
we're not the center of the universe
in a variety of ways over the years. You know, there's a lot of reasons I think Rhode Island really matters in the sense that it's a, real laboratory for doing diverse working class left politics. But it's not just a laboratory because of the kind of dysfunctional anti-democratic structure of our country. Every state has 2 U.S. senators, and Rhode Island is a rare deep blue small state and would be, for the socialist left, I think, pragmatically speaking, one of the easiest paths over the next decade to say, elect 2 U.S. senators who would never fund genocide in Gaza. How do you see the work you're doing in Providence as reverberating up to the state level, as you said, but also contributing to this larger national project?
What we need to do now more than ever is to activate our neighbors that feel disconnected from government. And I've been amazed to see the amount of volunteers, the amount of community members who have shared time after time. This will be the first local election I vote in. This is the first time I'm volunteering on a campaign. We are allowing, through this campaign, our neighbors to gain that level of class consciousness, but most importantly, know that they can be directly involved in the decisions that are made at the ballot box and then when it comes to actual governing. And so my goal is that following this campaign, we have built a movement with thousands of community members that believe in progressive politics and are now ready to start running for local office themselves as we continue to build a progressive bench. Because we're going to need that progressive bench, to your point, when it comes to running candidates for Congress, to running candidates for statewide offices like the governor's office, in addition to our U.S. senators. And I believe that through this grassroots campaign and the movement that we're building, we're laying the foundation and planting the seeds to make that happen over the next several years. Because the will is there. It's just about making sure that we have the people power to overcome the corporate interests that have held us back for so long.
Well, Representative David Morales, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. It's always a pleasure.
That was Representative David Morales, running to be the next mayor of my wonderful city of Providence, Rhode Island. Last up is Aparna Raj, a DSA-backed candidate for council in Washington, D.C., where I grew up. Aparna is a tenant organizer running on a housing justice platform in a city where gentrification has, over recent decades, displaced much of Black D.C. to the suburbs and beyond. It's also a city that Donald Trump has occupied with National Guard troops. For those listening from abroad and who aren't familiar, you should know that D.C. is in essence a colony of the federal government. There's no representation in Congress and no true home rule exercised by the city government. Our next episode, FYI, will include an interview with DSA-backed D.C. mayoral candidate Janice Lewis-George. Aparna Raj, welcome to The Dig.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
DSA has an endorsed candidate for D.C. Mayor, Councilwoman Janice Lewis-George, and I'll be interviewing her soon. But you are, I believe, the first DSA cadre candidate to run for office in the city. DSA cadre candidate, meaning someone who comes up through the ranks as an activist and leader in a DSA chapter, and then from that position runs for office. How did you get involved in the left and specifically with DSA? And how do you think about the role of a socialist elected official as an individual relating to the chapter as an organization?
Yeah. So I feel like a lot of other people, it was, the 2016 election was a big wake-up call for me. And I tried to figure out sort of where to start organizing, how to get involved locally. And I really found my political home in DSA around 2018, 2019, when I was struggling with my own housing issues with a really neglectful landlord. And I looked around, and the only organization who I really saw organizing tenants kind of militantly and organizing tenants around rent strikes was Stomp Out Slumlords, which was the tenant organizing campaign of DSA. So I started getting involved with them, doing anti-eviction canvases, organized a building in Ward 8, which is a predominantly Black, predominantly working class ward in DC. And I started organizing a building there around a rent strike to protest inhumane living conditions. And then from there, started getting way more involved with the chapter in general. I supported, our endorsed candidates in 2022 in DC and Maryland, and helped lead the fight to raise the tipped minimum wage in DC at the time. And then, supported Councilmember Janice Lewis-George's reelection campaign in 2024. And I also joined, I became part of the steering committee in Metro DC DSA from 2022 to 2024. And through my tenant organizing and through this electoral organizing, and also through being a union member and seeing DSA's solidarity with workers, really found DSA and really dove into DSA because I saw it as the biggest shot that we have as democratic socialists to really, fight for a better world, both at the local level and at the national level, and have really seen myself, a lot of elected officials across the country, whether they're in city council, whether they're in Congress, whether it's, Bernie Sanders. This has been an experience and kind of a mindset shift for me, coming from an organization and running sort of this campaign that's focused on the candidate. I see this campaign, though, as a movement. I was really inspired seeing in New York City the way that the organization that, was how DSA grew and built out during Zoran's campaign, and how that energy and that growth is being used, kind of as part of an inside-outside strategy with Zoran in as mayor. And that's what I am trying to build here too. We have a lot of labor unions who are supporting our campaign. We have, DSA has obviously been incredibly supportive of our campaign. And if I'm elected, I really see myself as an organizer in office and want to make sure that I'm still engaged with the chapter, that I'm still accountable to the chapter, and that we're really able to bring the momentum that we've been building up during this election to organize other council members and try to fight for a bold policy to expand rent stabilization, to fund free childcare, to raise wages, to expand our social safety net and make it possible for people to be able to live here for the long term.
You're running to represent Ward 1, an area that I spent a lot of time in as a 90s DC teenager going to punk rock shows. Neighborhoods like Mount Pleasant, Adams Morgan, U Street, Shaw, incredible neighborhoods, one of the densest, maybe the densest part of the city, a ton of nightlife, cultural legacy in the U Street corridor in terms of Black music and culture. They're also all neighborhoods that, like much of DC, have undergone dramatic gentrification over the last few decades. What's your vision for a housing agenda, both things like rent stabilization and programs like social housing that might allow Black and Latino working class DC to remain in the city rather than continuously being pushed out into the suburbs?
Absolutely. So I'm proud that Ward 1 is the densest ward in DC. It's still also the most diverse ward in DC, but we are really at risk of losing that. And, to your point, we've seen a ton of displacement already. A lot of, Latino families, a lot of Black families have been forced to leave Ward 1 or leave DC entirely. And as a tenant organizer, I've seen, the way that a lot of private landlords and big private landlords have tried to hike rents up to 20% or have neglected buildings to really inhumane levels. AC not working in the summer, heat not working in the winter, so people have to use their ovens to stay warm, which is completely unsafe. So social housing is my North Star for housing, really moving to mixed income housing that is publicly owned, that is tenant controlled. So we take profit out of housing and really make sure that our housing meets people's needs and that it also reflects what people want to see, whether they want to have a pharmacy or a childcare center or something in their housing, making sure that we're designing housing around people's full lives. As we get there, I see this balance that I've seen start to emerge, I think, around a lot of other leftist candidates, where we do need more housing in DC. We need to end exclusionary zoning in a lot of our neighborhoods. We need more family-sized housing instead of just sort of studios and one bedrooms. And if we're building that housing, we have to make sure that people can afford to live there. And right now in DC, our rent stabilization laws only apply to buildings built before 1975. So as we build more housing, that's fewer and fewer people who are protected and whose landlords can hike their rent up as much as they want. So we have to bring rent stabilization to apply to modern multifamily buildings as well. And then also, DC has really paved the way with a lot of tenant protections. I believe that we were the first city to have the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, which allows tenants, when the landlord puts their buildings up for sale or their house up for sale, to try to buy it and potentially form a co-op or have negotiating power to be able to demand, rent concessions or fixes to their building. That right has been chipped away at in recent years, but it's something that takes property and puts it in the hands of people. And I want to also fight to restore that and make sure that we have, whether it's social housing, whether it is limited equity co-ops, that we're providing as many avenues as possible for people to have ownership over where they live and have a say in where they live and preserve long-term affordability in DC.
Metro DC DSA is well known for its tenant organizing work, initially with the Stomp Out Slumlords project launched, I think, during the pandemic. Is that?
Stomp Out Slumlords started probably 2016, 2017, but it really took off during the pandemic.
Yeah, and it was fascinating to watch from a distance. We learned a lot from it in Rhode Island. This project that was in deep partnership with Unite Here Local 25. Oftentimes, though, in DSA chapters and really across the left, work like tenant organizing gets pitted against electoral work. How has that played out in the DC chapter? How have you had these sorts of conflicts, and how have you managed over the long haul to really commit to doing both, allowing the two things to positively reinforce and build upon one another?
Yeah, we've definitely had some of those same conflicts ourselves. This ongoing question of whether it's base building or whether it's, trying to contest electoral and legislative power. And a lot of those fights actually preceded my time.
Lucky you.
But I was very fortunate to come in to a chapter that's already negotiated that. It still resurfaces a little bit too. But I think seeing the power that electing Councilmember Janice Lewis-George in 2020 and seeing what she was able to do, and also seeing what we were at risk of losing when we don't have, staunch democratic socialists who will fight to protect tenant protections, has really reinforced the need that we have to keep base building. We have to keep building, worker and tenant power, but we also need people on the inside who can be responsive to that. I mentioned how TOPA has been chipped away at year after year. SOS in recent years, we caught wind that the real estate industry was going to try to chip away at TOPA and remove it from affordable housing buildings as well as buildings with 2 to 4 units. It was originally a universal right when it was passed in 1980. And we organized, we brought, we canvassed buildings that we were organizing. We brought people out to the Wilson building, had them protest. We were able to head it off for 1 year, but then they brought it back in 2025 and were able to successfully take TOPA away from thousands of tenants in those 2 to 4 unit buildings. And we had Councilmember Janice Lewis-George oppose it. We had a couple other council members who opposed it, but it wasn't enough to really push back against the onslaught of lobbying from the real estate industry and from corporate developers. And also the tenant protections that we have, I think of that as there was incredible tenant organizing in the 70s and 80s in DC. And the reason that we have the ability to rent strike in DC, the reason that we have the ability to withhold our rent if the landlord isn't holding their end of the bargain and providing safe, habitable living conditions, is because of both of the tenant organizing and of the council members at the time who put that into DC's housing code, that we have that right. So, we come from decades of sort of that inside-outside collaboration of legislators being responsive to tenant organizing and being responsive to labor organizing, whether or not they wanted to be. And I think that we see now, and our chapter recognizes now, both from having a lot of rights that we benefit from and seeing those rights at risk, that we really need to have people who won't be swayed by all of the lobbyists that come through council members' offices and who have a record of democratic socialist organizing, of tenant organizing, of labor organizing. And that's, how I want to govern.
DC is essentially a colony of the federal government. I grew up in DC. I was active in the statehood movement in the late 90s as a teenager, a time when there was a federal control board that shut down DC's public hospital, DC General. I interned for the DC Statehood Green Party. There's a whole long, complicated history of DC, of struggle in DC. How would you use your seat on city council to fight for a free DC?
Oh, that's a great question. I really hope we see DC statehood in my lifetime, and I will fight for it. I see it in a number of ways. I think since the occupation started last August, we've seen a ton of volunteer efforts to protect immigrants, to make sure that people...
The federal occupation with National Guard, troops, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of community members were making sure that students could get to school safely, were, walking neighborhoods to, see if ICE was active, things like that. But it took so long for our local elected officials to even be willing to say that we're a sanctuary city and that immigrants belong here, let alone also try to work to protect immigrants or strengthen our Sanctuary Values Act. I think on the very immediate level, my focus will be trying to end our local police department's collaboration with ICE and making sure that at the local level, we're not undermining our own autonomy, making sure that we're protecting immigrants, LGBTQ folks, that we are supporting federal workers who've been laid off, and trying to get people through this period as much as possible, and making the fight for DC statehood a national fight. We have seen over the past 2 years that DC has almost been a testing ground for the Trump administration, and that what he starts in DC does not end in DC. And if we want every community to be safe, and if we want to have a true democracy in the U.S., DC cannot continue to exist as you said, this colony under the federal government. We have over 700,000 people, predominantly Black people, who are being denied voting representation and who are being denied even basic funding for services because we are not a state. We have no control over our own budget. And we are trying to, if we're going to try to fight for the working class across the U.S., it also has to happen for the residents in D.C. as well. And so I will, try to govern as best I can locally. And, for every Democratic Socialist across the country, for every progressive across the country, we need to make sure that the fight for D.C. statehood is the fight for whatever happens over the next 4 years or 8 years. And on a very cynical level, I hope that the Democrats who are waging these redistricting fights, especially in Virginia, we just saw the 10-1, ballot initiative pass. I hope they also want to see, 2 new senators and a voting congressional representative as well.
Totally. Well, Aparna Raj, thank you very, very much.
No, thank you.
That was Aparna Raj, a DSA-backed candidate for council in Washington, D.C. Before her, we heard from Abdul El-Sayed, Justin Pearson, Darializa Avila Chevalier, Tammy Carpenter, and David Morales. Stay tuned for more candidates next episode. Thank you for listening to The Dig from Jacobin Magazine. As Marx once said, after noting that the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class to win the battle of democracy. While other podcasts have only interpreted the world in various ways, our point is to change it. We're posting new episodes most weeks. The Dig was produced by Alex Lewis. Our associate producer is Jackson Roach. Music by Jeffrey Brodsky. Our operations manager is Sylvia Atwood. Our senior advisors are Theoria Francos and Ben Mabey. Check out our vast archives and newsletters at thedigradio.com. Follow us on Twitter and also Instagram and Blue Sky at The Dig Radio. And please do find us wherever you get podcasts and subscribe to this one. If it's on iTunes or Spotify or wherever, please also rate and review us favorably. Those reviews help introduce us to new listeners, but what does that most of all is you telling friends, family, acquaintances, frenemies to check out the pod. You like it, maybe they will too. Please make propaganda for us, and do find us at patreon.com and make a monthly or annual contribution to help keep this operation up and running strong. Even a few bucks is huge.